Welcome to the CEMTF second virtual summit series, United Actions for an Environmentally Just Regenerative Future. And today's topic is clean and just transportation. I'm so happy to see everyone here. So far, we have 71 folks, and we're starting a little late. We're hoping to get Karina Gould in the room, but I'm not sure if she's here yet. But this is our second virtual summit series. I'm Cheryl Davila, the founder of the CEMTF and the former council member for the city of Berkeley. If you all remember, in 2018, Berkeley passed through my office a fossil fuel-free resolution and the climate emergency declaration, which passed unanimously. And also while I was on council, I was looking out for the city of Berkeley residents, trying to make clean transportation possible. So we put forth an ordinance in December 19 to terminate the sale of gas, diesel, and natural gas passenger vehicles throughout the city of Berkeley by 2025. That item got put towards committees, policy committees, and it went before council in January 2021. When I was no longer on the council, it got some revisions, but it did pass. So hopefully that'll be happening. And then, you know, here we are in the COVID-19 pandemic. We have fires, earthquakes, drought, heat. We've known this has been coming, yet we don't have the infrastructure or the availability to electrify fleets within municipalities. And we have a lot of work to do. And we're out of time, as we just heard this week. And we've been knowing for quite some time, the time frame is getting shorter and shorter. So we have a lot to do. So sit back, get your coffee, your tea, and your breakfast, and get ready for action-packed day of clean and just transportation. Again, I'm going to look for Karina Gould. Is she in the room? Does anybody know? I'm not seeing Karina, who was an amazing woman. She's the chair and spokeswoman for the Confederated Villages of Lejeune, Ohlone. And she was supposed to be here this morning for land acknowledgement. I know she was having issues with the link, so maybe she's not going to make it. So I'll do a land acknowledgement. I'm here on Ohlone territory, and welcome to the city of Berkeley has Ohlone territory on the signs, which is another thing that I did while I was in office. And we would like to take this moment to acknowledge that we're sitting on the territory of Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chenyo Lejeune Ohlone people. And it's important that we acknowledge and recognize that our communities continue to benefit from the use and occupation of this land. So remember, there is a shell mound in Emeryville. There's one in Berkeley. You can go there and say a few prayers and hope that the Berkeley becomes a real shell mound again and gets back to the Ohlone people. And now we can just continue on with the introduction of the day by Amos White. He's part of the CEMTF steering committee. Thank you.
Thank
and
you,
welcome
Cheryl.
Everyone. Oh, I'm sorry. One more second. I just wanted to thank, I forgot, everyone for being here this morning. I'm a little, I guess, a little stressed this morning. I haven't had adequate coffee. It's a little depressing with all the things that are going on in the world. And, but I wanted to thank Jack specifically because he's the one who coordinated this event today. And all the speakers, assemblymen, Ting, Phil Ting for being here this morning, and Dan, Sperling, and all the speakers and panelists, and for the steering committee, because without y'all, we would not be here today. And everyone's put in so much work and time. And I just wanted to appreciate everyone for being here and for all of you for getting this together today. Thank you. Go ahead, Amos.
Thank you. And good morning, everyone. My name's Amos White. And Cheryl, with all due respect and kudos, always thank you for the vision, for all your energy and tireless effort in pulling us together and holding space for us and still seeing us to this point to take on this enormous challenge and to validate your feelings. It's been a heavy week for myself, as well as Cheryl did point out from the IPCC report. We've not run out of time, nor of options, but it's a heavy load and a heavier lift that all of us now must all do a part or take a part in. And it's to get to carbon negative before 2030. So with this summit today on clean and just transportation, we are going to hear from speakers and a keynote. We're going to be in panels to actually look at what are solutions, what are the challenges we have structurally, what are the challenges that we have in our municipalities, what are the challenges we have in our frontline communities and in our impacted neighborhoods, and how can we center those people and realign investments through our climate action plans so that we're solving for climate while building resiliency within our communities. I do have the distinct honor and pleasure of introducing our keynotes. We'll begin with hearing from a keynote from Assembly Member Phil Ting. Assemblymember Ting has been a true climate champion in the state assembly here in California. He's introducing, or has been introducing, far-reaching and creative bills to combat the climate crisis in many ways, and includes phasing out fossil fuel vehicles. As chair of the Assembly Budget Committee, he's well positioned to support funding for clean alternatives to polluting transportation. And I just want to add one quote that Phil Ting tells it like it is. Big oil is not going down without a fight. Please join me in welcoming Assemblymember Phil Ting.
Thank you, Amos. Really appreciate that very nice welcome, and just great to be here with 350 Bay Area. It's absolutely a pleasure. You're the reason that we've actually moved on this climate issue. Your advocacy, your organizing, your amplification of this issue to talk about clean cars, but clean transportation, whether it's active transportation or clean public transportation. It really is all of your organizing up and down the state that has made a huge, huge difference. We are turning the tide on this issue. We now have a partner in Washington, D.C. We had an adversary in Washington, D.C. just a few months ago. And so it's been a huge, huge titanic shift in mindset in terms of clean cars. We have President Biden just recently announced a goal of 50% EV sales by 2030. Our governor was able to move forward with legislation that I introduced, but issued an executive order mandating 100% electric vehicle sales by 2035. And we continue to move very aggressively through our our California Air Resources Board. They are moving and having aggressive regulations in terms of getting us the path to 100% by 2035. But we're going to need your help. The automakers have been slow to move. They've been somewhat schizophrenic. With one side of their mouth, General Motors talks about a clean vehicle revolution. And on the other side, they fought us on the fuel economy, the CAFE standards. When we needed their help to have California's higher CAFE standards, they sided with the Trump administration. And so it's really incumbent on us at 350 Bay Area and really all the advocates to make sure that we are holding General Motors accountable, we're holding all the automakers accountable, and we're holding big oil accountable. Big oil sees that this is eventually going to be the light at the end of the tunnel for them. So they're moving into other industries like plastics. They are really trying to think if they can diversify themselves out of fossil fuels and maybe into clean electricity. You see Shell very smartly starting to move toward electricity. And so we need to make sure that we are absolutely holding all these players accountable. We need to do a better job in just making sure that we're talking to our community members. We're talking to our neighbors. Big oil puts out the myth that clean cars are only for wealthy people, that only wealthy people will benefit from clean vehicles, clean transportation. It's absolutely not true. If you look at any kind of technology, whether it's a computer, the cell phone, or I remember when my dad bought the first expensive calculator when calculators were expensive, early adopters pay a price to move the market forward. That's what we're seeing. So that's why I've been such a huge proponent for the Clean Vehicle Rebate Program here in California. I'm also a proponent to make sure that we are offering incentives for used clean vehicles, because a lot of middle income working families, they don't buy new cars, they buy used cars. And so we want to make sure that they have access to clean vehicles. On top of that, what's very important is making sure that there is EV charging infrastructure that is available for all communities. And we've been making that a major priority. The private sector has been doing their part. We've been pushing our California PUC to approve the applications at PG&E, SoCal Edison, SDG&E. They really want to do a heavy investment in charging stations there in every community up and down the state just about. We want to make sure that they continue to invest, or allowed to invest, in building out our EV charging infrastructure. We've had huge leadership at the legislature, and in this year's budget, let me just talk about some of the major items that we were able to put in the budget, which is a 3-year budget. It's $525 million for the Clean Vehicle Rebate Program, $400 million for incentives for low-income Californians to purchase EVs, $915 million for zero-emission vehicle infrastructure, $1.36 billion for trucks and buses. I know that impacts us less as consumers, but it has a huge impact on our air quality. So many of our communities are the ones who live close to the freeways. They suffer most from all the buses and the trucks that travel up and down our freeways delivering very critical goods. But the sooner that we can make them clean, the better our air quality will be, especially in Southern California. Another $250 million to expand zero emission vehicle manufacturing. And lastly, $407 million to help local governments electrify. Oftentimes, local governments have really been the leads. You see charging stations at community centers. You see charging stations in front of city halls. You see charging stations at parks and libraries. And if we can encourage and incentivize local governments, quite often they're going to be the first in many of their communities to develop EV charging infrastructure. So what can you all do? You've already done a huge amount just by you organizing this summit, getting us all together to talk about how we can have a clean transportation future. That goes a long way. I think the next part is continuing to organize in your local communities. Don't underestimate really changing hearts and minds by having conversations with your neighbors. Your neighbors would much rather hear from you than frankly hear from me. You're their credible source. So if you can talk to your neighbors, you can work in your communities, talk to them about why it's important. Why clean cars are important, why clean public transportation is important, why active transportation, riding your bike, walking to work is extremely important. It's really important that people see alternatives. Change is difficult. So when you ask people to give up something that they're very familiar with, that they've grown up with, it's very difficult for them to adopt that technology immediately. I want you also to continue to be active in elections. You should make sure that your voice is heard when people like me are running for office, when we're seeking endorsements, when we're seeking support when we're seeking votes. It's really important that you're there to talk about your agenda, why your agenda is important, and also why you have a number of people in your community who are going to vote a particular way because of people's particular stances on clean transportation, on clean energy, on the environment, on climate change. So it's important to say, hey, we're not looking just for people who are going to be a good vote, or we're not just looking for people that we can convince. We're looking for climate leaders. And this is really important that we're going to prioritize climate leadership. And if you're the climate leader, then we're going to get behind your campaign. We're going to work for you. We're going to support you. We're going to make sure that the community knows that you're the climate leader, and we want you in Sacramento. We want you in City Hall. It is so important. And quite conversely, if people aren't climate leaders, it's also important to say that. It's important to say, hey, don't vote for this person because they're not climate leaders. They're not going to be supporting our communities. Their agenda is theirs to support big oil. Big oil is playing in fewer and fewer races because most of us now won't take their money, won't talk to them, won't work with them. But when they play big. So in a number of my colleagues' races, they got elected with tens of millions of dollars of big oil support, no question. And so it's important that, big oil can't buy votes. They can try to mislead people, but what they don't have is you. You can outwork them, out hustle them, you can out maneuver them and out educate them. So this is so important. So lastly, after you've worked hard to get people elected, make sure you continue to hold people like us accountable. You want to schedule regular meetings. You want to make sure that you keep regular conversations. You want to also just keep pushing, especially the ones who are movable. Those of my colleagues who maybe aren't the everyday environmentalists, aren't the most solid on these issues. You want to keep talking to them. I always say for assembly members and senators, the best time to talk to them is when we're back in the district in the fall. So don't worry about coming to Sacramento. I mean, a lot of people come to Sacramento, it's great, but meet us in the fall where it's a little more relaxed. The timing is a little bit easier to get a hold of us. It's time when we start to think about next year, so get in front of our agenda, not in the back of it. And so it's really important that you two can be advocates there, and don't forget your local cities, your local counties. We really need to see more leadership from the city and the county level, especially because, again, cities purchase cars, counties purchase cars, they purchase also buses, and they purchase fleets. And so it's really important that as they're making those purchases, that those purchases reflect your values. Some of the transit agencies, I've heard so many complaints that it's really been hard to get transit agencies to adopt electric buses because there's all these myths. Oh, they can't go up the hill. Oh, it takes too long to charge. Oh, they're not reliable. Oh, they're not fast enough, right? Can they really transport all these people? And so there's all these myths perpetrated by the status quo. And so it's really important that we educate and hold accountable our elected leaders, our city county leadership, to say, hey, when you're buying those new buses, we want clean buses on our streets. We don't want the dirty buses anymore, especially if you're going to go buy the new ones. And so there's so many different ways to stay active. I really appreciate, I know almost all of you are volunteers. It's very difficult. You all lead busy lives, but for you to be able to focus on this one issue, for you to be able to continue to advocate and work in our communities, it makes a huge difference. So I'm so proud to join you today and talk about this very important issue. So proud to join you for this summit, and just thank you so much for all the great work.
Thank you, Assemblymember Ting. We really appreciate those words, and thank you for all the work that you've done in the community, and thank you for your service. I do also have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Dan Sperling. Dan Sperling is the Distinguished Professor of Civil Engineering and Environmental Science and Policy, and the founding director, I should add, of the Institute of Transportation Studies at the University of California, Davis, otherwise known as ITS Davis. He holds the transportation seat on the California Air Resources Board and served as chair of the Transportation Research Board of the National Academies in 2015 through 2016. Please join me in welcoming Dan Sperling.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really am pleased to join you and to follow Assemblymember, Phil Ting. He has been such a great leader, and I'm going to refer to a study that we did for the legislature, the University of California, which he was the chief advocate for in the legislature. So he has been a great leader. And one thing, a couple points I'd like to add before I get started is that what we talk about here, like what Phil Ting is talking about, what you are all doing, is so important because California, if you talk about the climate change, California is a tiny part of the total greenhouse gases emitted in the world. But California is a model and a leader. And what we do here is imitated and replicated in so many other places. So this is, what we do is actually far more important than just Berkeley or just California. So kudos to all of you, kudos to Phil Ting, and this is great. And what he says about, more activism, holding our leaders accountable, supporting them is so critical. And I would note also that don't think of all of us as activists or even voters, but we're also consumers. And I want to emphasize that part of it, because for these changes to happen, it's us making decisions about what we buy and how we travel. So I'm talking about transportation here. And I do want to say also, I have one additional credential that Amos didn't add, and that is I lived in Berkeley for 30 years, and including doing graduate work at UC Berkeley. So very well acquainted, love the cheese board, love all kinds of other institutions, the Berkeley rep, and so much more. So Jack posed to me the question, how do we accelerate the phase out of gasoline cars and the adoption of EVs? And that is an excellent question. And that's mostly going to frame it, but I'm also going to talk about not just light duty vehicles, but trucks a little bit, because we can and will and are electrifying the trucks. And when I say electrify, I also include hydrogen and fuel cells. And I also want to emphasize this has to do also with our behavior as users of transportation. Someone put in the chat something about using bicycles. And as you see, my favorite zero emission vehicle is my bicycle right behind me. So that is all part of this. So so to answer that question that Jack posed, there's no question about whether we're going to decarbonize and get to carbon neutrality. The question is how fast and how. So I referred to that study we did that myself and Gil Tao, who's going to be speaking a little later, we headed up a study for the state of California on how do we decarbonize, and we use the date 2045. And I know people are talking about decarbonizing before 2045. And I have to say, for transportation, frankly, that's impossible. But it's a good goal to aspire to something better than that. But if we get to carbon neutrality by 2045, that's going to be a tremendous accomplishment. And it's going to involve tremendous changes in California. So yes, we can get to carbon neutrality, and okay, and in our study we found, I won't get into the details of the study, but you can look it up on the ITS Davis website. We can get to that, and it does involve getting the transition to electric vehicles. Really is electrified vehicles really is the key to that. That is the number one strategy by far to decarbonize. These other things are really important too, but often for other reasons as well as decarbonization. So we should do that. Now, one little reason why this decarbonization in transportation is very doable is that, contrary to what you hear from many politicians, not Phil Ting, but from many other politicians, is that we don't need a lot of public money to decarbonize transportation. In fact, by decarbonizing transportation, we actually are going to save money for consumers, save money for the economy. And that's for one simple reason. And that is that the cost of electric vehicles is coming down so fast that it won't equal the price of a gasoline car for quite a while. but it is coming down, but it's offset by the fact that the electricity cost for an EV is far less than the gasoline cost for an internal combustion engine vehicle. And so that savings on energy plus savings on maintenance, because electric vehicles are much simpler, much less maintenance, more than offset the additional cost. And so as costs come down, within about 4, 5, 6 years, if you buy an electric vehicle, you'll be saving money. Now, if you use the vehicle a lot, there's lots of assumptions behind that. If you buy one now and use it a lot, you'll probably can come out ahead. So that's a really important point. I think in the advocacy, it's a point that's lost, and I would urge you to, bring that into the advocacy, that this is not something that costs money. This is something that saves us money. And Gil Tal will talk more about this later on in his talk. Okay, so let me talk about where we are right now. So the reality is, in California, we've done great on decarbonizing electricity. We're making great progress and using much more renewable energy, solar and wind especially. But really, we've done a poor job on almost everything else, including transportation. So where we are in transportation is in California, about 10% of the new light duty vehicles sold. When I say light duty vehicles, I mean our cars, our SUVs, and our pickup trucks, and our minivans. So with our light duty vehicles, about 10% of the sales now are electric vehicles. Now, you might consider that a lot or a little. I think that's way too low, way too small. It's been actually at that market share for about 3 years now. We've made very little progress. And in some ways, even worse than that is something like 2/3 to 3/4 of those vehicles are Teslas. And that means that the other people are not buying the other cars, and the other companies are not really pushing those other EVs, even though they have some of them ready to go. So that's where we are. We're at about 10%. The rest of the United States is about at 1.5%. So we're doing much better than the rest of the US, but we're doing much worse than Europe. Europe is now about 18%. In fact, some countries like Norway's at 75%, and we're at 10%. So we can do much, much better. We should be doing much better. And part of what happened here is some of our policies were slowed down during the Trump era. And I'll talk a little bit about it as my role on the California Air Resources Board. The governor has said, we want 100%. Phil Ting has said that of cars being EVs by 2035, but we actually don't have the regulations in place to require the car companies to do that, never mind the incentives and the charging infrastructure. So right now, the status of that is that the California Air Resources, or us, are in the process of developing requirements, but those won't take effect until 2026. So we've lost a lot of time, but from 2026 to 2035, we are going to adopt a very aggressive requirements. We haven't done it yet, so I can't say, it's a done deal, but almost for certain, we will have something like a requirement for 100% ZEVs, zero emission vehicles in 2035. So that's kind of the EV story. It's kind of a mixed story from a regulatory perspective. Where we've not done well in transportation is on vehicle use. The amount of vehicle use in California has actually gone up the last 10 years. Whether you look at it as vehicle use per capita or total, it's not gotten better. And that's disappointing. And also transit use has gone down, and not just during the pandemic, but it had been going down since about 2010. So we're not making progress there, and we need to change that. So as I said, though, there's a lot of hope because the rest of the world, in many ways, the rest of the, well, let me put it this way, China and Europe are moving much faster than the US, and frankly, even faster than California at this point. And China, for instance, has 10% of all their vehicles sold are electric vehicles now for the whole country. And that's California is 40 million people. They're 1.4 billion people. And so they're really moving ahead aggressively on EVs. So, okay, so let me talk a little bit about trucks. So this is not just a story about cars, because we can electrify our trucks. Also, in fact, the California Air Resources Board, we already adopted requirements that are more aggressive than the requirements for cars. It requires that most trucks, that 75% of most truck sales be zero emission vehicles by 2035. And that even includes the long haul trucks, that 40% of long haul trucks must be zero emission by 2035. So that regulation, those rules are already in place. They take effect in 2024, in 3 years. And all of the truck companies are moving in that direction. And what I said about saving money for cars, it's the same story for most trucks. Most trucks will be saving, most owners of trucks will be saving money. And, especially all these delivery trucks we see that are not traveling very long distances, they can be electrified, put batteries in them, and for some of them, put hydrogen and fuel cells in them, and they will be saving money in a few years as battery costs and truck costs come down. And that was one of the findings of our big study for the state of California, by the way. When I look through some of the other parts, transit buses, that's another success story. So we do have a requirement that all new transit buses must be zero emission starting around 2028. The rule actually says all buses must be zero emission by 2040, but since buses last about 12 years, that means starting about 2028, all new buses in the state should be zero emission. So that's a success story. On fuels, part of the reason why this transition is so hard to zero emission is to carbon neutrality is that even if we went to electric vehicles, and even if we did it in 2030, there's still a lot of vehicles on the road, gasoline and diesel vehicles, and that are burning gasoline and diesel. And it's really, those vehicles are going to be around for a while. So that's part of the reason why the actual transition, can't happen, even faster than we would, than I've been talking about. And then there's aviation. That's a big challenge. It's really hard to electrify planes. So some short range planes, they go 100 miles, 200 miles, maybe someday 400 miles, but probably not, can be electric with batteries or hydrogen, and maybe a little longer with hydrogen. But that aviation's a real challenge. The problem is in California, we don't have authority over aviation except what's in our state, and that's really just a small part of it. So we're making much less progress on aviation, but anyone that wants to focus on that, let me know, because that is something that is really important. And that's almost more of that truly is a global challenge. And then the last issue is this vehicle use. That's really a frustrating problem. We want to reduce vehicle use, not only for climate change, but for so many other reasons. It reduces the amount of space we devote to parking and roads. It means that there's more safety because we're not killing pedestrians, not creating hazards. So we do want to reduce vehicle use, for public health reasons and environmental reasons and economic reasons. it's not, we've not made good success. You know, transit's gone down, vehicle miles traveled is pretty much back to where it was before the pandemic. We've had a little progress. We've closed a few streets. You know, we're taking a little parking away to put in restaurants and other public uses, and that's all good. More of that is good. So, you know, so the last thing I want to talk about is moving forward. And partly I want to say all those ideas that are listed in the toolkit of actions that you've all put together, almost all of them are great, I think are great ideas. And it's really a question of prioritizing which ones are easier, which ones are faster, which ones are more effective. But they're all good ideas, except for one that I differ with. And I don't want to get into a big debate with the folks about the TNCs, the Ubers and Lyfts, because I know there's a lot of hostility to them in this environment. But I want to point out that the greatest hope we have in transportation for reducing vehicle use has to do with the use of apps and sharing. And Uber and Lyft pioneered that. You know, without them, we wouldn't have all of these new business models being created, the possibility of micro-mobility, the swappable bikes and scooters. And in the long term, so, you know, I don't want to get into this as a big thing, but I want to say that in the longer term, the only really hope we have for really large reductions in vehicle use is to automate our vehicles and make sure that those automated vehicles are not individually owned, but are owned by mobility service companies or they can be nonprofits or government, but mobility service companies, and that all the incentives we create are for the pooling of those vehicles. And that's what we should be doing with Lyft and Uber, is adopting incentives and requirements that they have more pooled, that they have more than one rider. So all the criticisms of the footprint, you know, the carbon footprint of them are because they're mostly carrying one passenger. But if they carry more, there's companies like Via that are using small buses and vans that carry even more people. And they're a very good complement to transit. And so once you get away from the line haul type routes like Route 51, you know, of AC Transit, you know, you get into areas that are less amenable to big buses and to BART. Okay, so let me close by just saying, you know, from a policy perspective, California is on a good path. You know, we're adopting rules and requirements for zero emission vehicles. We're adopting incentives for their use. We're approving money for charging infrastructures, for hydrogen stations. And so all on a policy level, we're doing pretty good, but in the real world, we're not doing really, really good. And so part of it is we as consumers, we need to be buying those electric vehicles. We need to be using bicycles and electric bikes and scooters. We need to be walking when possible. And so, and we need, okay, if I had more time, I would said, okay, how many of you use Amazon Prime, you know, that are calling these trucks to show up, you know, multiple times a day? Some people have trucks showing up multiple times a day to their household. You know, that is going in the wrong direction. We need to do something about that. So there's a lot of things we can fix. I think we kind of know what to do. All those ideas in the toolkit are, you know, most of them are kind of small ideas, but part of it, because this is really complicated. I would add one idea that was just hinted there that I'm a very big proponent of, is the idea of fee baits. And that's the idea that if you buy a gas guzzler, if you buy a gasoline or diesel vehicle, you pay a fee. If you buy an electric vehicle, then those fees are transferred and given to you as a rebate. Because our incentive systems that exist today, the CBRP that Phil Ting was talking about, is not going to be nearly enough to to provide the incentives that we need. So some kind of fee-based concept, and maybe it can even be done on a local level. I haven't really thought about that a lot. You know, maybe even Berkeley can do something, but certainly creating the incentives for EVs, creating the incentives for pooled vehicles, creating the incentives for bikes, building more bike infrastructure. You know, I live in Davis. I bike everywhere all the time. I could not do that in Berkeley, both because the infrastructure didn't exist and it wasn't safe. And of course, there's the hills, but then now we have electric bikes. So that solves that problem. So thank you all. This is wonderful what you're all doing. And I can't wait to hear some of the other ideas that come up here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Excuse me, everyone. Thank you. Right now, we're going to move right ahead to our first panel. That's going to be on encouraging transit, walking, and biking. It's facilitated by Yusra Arab. Yusra is a UC Berkeley urban studies student, has been working with the CEMTF, and very excited to introduce you to her in this, or to this body and this panel today. Yusra.
Thank you so much, Amos, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for that wonderful introduction from Cheryl and from our wonderful keynote speakers. Once again, it's come full circle. We're finally here for another summit and another hopefully productive conversation with wonderful panelists that we have lined up this morning for all of you. So welcome everyone, good morning. I just want to take a second to introduce myself. My name is Yusra and I'm currently a third year urban studies major at UC Berkeley this year. Once again, incredibly excited to join you all this morning as we engage in discussion specifically around transit, walking, and biking in our local Bay Area counties and cities. Today, hopefully, we can address some of the really big questions about livability of our cities and also question the future of transit in regards to the growing homelessness crisis, the technological innovations of our highways and of our cities' infrastructure, and also the policies and the regulations that hopefully can encourage affordable and transit-friendly housing. So, in the next hour or so, we encourage all of you to actively engage in discussions, ask questions to our wonderful panelists. Hopefully by the end of the day, we can walk away with a toolkit that Jack worked really hard with our other amazing steering committees to put together. And this toolkit can help guide us in unwrapping the complexity of the future of transit, especially as it pertains to our local cities. So with us today, we have a lineup of panelists that can help address these topics. And I want to start off by welcoming Chirag, who is part of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, or MTC, and the Plan Bay Area implementation team. He serves as the principal planner in the regional planning program at MTC and ABAG, and as project manager for the Plan Bay Area implementation plan, he was charged with developing near-term actions that we can take to implement bold transportation, housing, and other environmental strategies that are included in Bay Area's long-range regional plan. So without further ado, I'll pass it on over to Chirag to start us off.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Yusra, and everyone. I am, as Yusra mentioned, so I'm going to be reviewing our Plan Bay Area 2050. And can you all see the slides? Yes, okay, excellent. So we're going to review the long-range plan that we're currently developing and talk about how it tries to further our state, regional, and local goals with respect to climate, equity, transit, walking, biking, and a whole host of areas. And then we're going to transition to some of the specific things we're looking to do in the next 1 to 5 years to support plan implementation. So just to quickly recap, the Plan Bay Area 2050 is a joint effort of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governments. MTC is the MPO and Regional Transportation Planning Agency for the region, and ABAG is the Regional Council of Governments. And the plan tries to identify a suite of integrated strategies that will enable the region to accommodate future growth in a resilient and equitable manner. Importantly, there are targets for greenhouse gas emission reductions, which are set by the California Air Resources Board to reduce those GHG emissions, per capita GHG emissions from light duty cars and trucks. And our plan needs to achieve a per capita reduction of 19% by the year 2035. So before we delve into the meat of this, I do want to just emphasize that this has been a robust 4-year planning process to develop this plan, and it's been very much a public process. We have engaged with tens of thousands of residents, hundreds of partners and stakeholders, and many regional policymakers in the development of this plan. And we released the draft of the plan in the spring, and we're looking to adopt the final Plan Bay Area 2050 this fall. So the first slide kind of gave an overview of the plan requirements, but it's important to note that this plan goes much further than previous regional planning efforts. For the first time, we had a vision and guiding principles, which were informed by all of that public input and adopted by our commission and executive board. And that was to ensure that by the year 2050, the Bay Area is affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant for all of its residents. And in terms of the scope of the plan, whereas previous iterations of the plan focused on just transportation, and then the last 2 iterations of the plan in 2013 and 2017 focused on transportation and housing, this plan has expanded its scope even further to look at the economy and the environment as well. So it's really, it's a very wide-ranging in its scope. As we mentioned, per state planning requirements, this plan has to project a regional growth pattern and identify a land use patterns which, when combined with transportation, can accommodate future growth in a manner that reduces those per capita GHG emissions. And as you can see, for the 1.4 million new households and new jobs that are projected between now and 2050 to come into the 9-county region, the plan really seeks to focus growth in a manner that protects open space and conservation areas and avoid growth in high hazard areas. So it's really about infill development, compact development, access to existing transportation resources, and transit. And these are called growth geographies. One thing that I do want to call out here is that for the first time, the plan does include high resource areas in its growth geographies. And that's really emphasizing the critical importance of equity and access to opportunity, even though, as we'll discuss later, there are some difficult trade-offs that happen in terms of GHG reduction when you're trying to accommodate more growth in those kinds of areas. So the plan has 11 key themes and a total of 35 adopted strategies. Now, I'm not going to review them all, but just given the sort of scope of our panel, I do want to emphasize that in our theme of creating healthy and safe streets, the plan envisions a 10,000-mile regional network of bike lanes and multi-use paths. It's really looking to support expanded car-free slow streets. For our Vision Zero goals, we are looking to reduce speed limits between the 20 and 35 miles to 20 to 35 miles an hour on arterials and local streets, as well as to 55 miles per hour on freeways. In our theme of reducing climate emissions, we're really trying to ramp up our electrification efforts, including incentives for 350,000 new electric vehicles with priority for low-income buyers, as well as 50,000 public electric vehicle chargers. And these are much, much higher level of investments compared to past plans. We also, in terms of our existing transit system, we're really looking at trying to enable seamless mobility and reforming our regional fare policy to take the friction away from folks using our existing transit network. Now, doing all of this is not cheap, in terms of implementing all of these 35 strategies over the next 30 years. Overall, it's a $1.4 trillion plan, and that very much relies heavily on new revenue sources. And as you can see in the pie chart here, most of the existing revenue sources are in the transportation space, and those are primarily from federal, state, and local sources. So advocacy will be key in terms of generating the revenues we need to implement this plan. But we'll circle back to this question of what some of these strategies cost and what are most effective in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In terms of what this plan, would help accomplish, I think, it's important to note that it would help us meet that greenhouse gas emission targets, but it would also help protect nearly all homes from sea level rise impacts through 2050. We would improve access to frequent transit and safe bicycle pedestrian facilities, and enabling nearly 20% of workers to shift away from commuting by auto modes. And I think importantly, as I was mentioning with our other goals, the plan would help reduce the housing and transportation cost burden, with especially significant improvements for our low-income households, and would also provide more affordable housing in historically exclusionary jurisdictions. So I did want to touch a little bit on the greenhouse gas emission reduction targets and how the plan would help support the achievement of those goals. I think it's important to note when we were talking about that $1.4 trillion plan and the need for new revenues to support these investments, that with the major and significant exception of electric vehicles, oftentimes it's really policy changes that are the most impactful in helping us get to that GHG reduction target. And sometimes those policies, they don't quote cost anything at all, or in the context of a $1.4 trillion plan, they could be relative bargains. But those can be very politically challenging. For example, land use matters a lot, but regional agencies don't have land use control. Generally, it's local jurisdictions with some state preemption depending upon circumstances, and it's very hard to enable greater housing densities in some of those growth geographies that we previously flagged, or enable greater commercial densities. There are a lot of veto points in that kind of in that area, which makes accommodating those kinds of changes very challenging. Or road pricing. The plan envisions pricing congested freeways that have available transit alternatives, but that politically, would be a very heavy and challenging lift. And there are certainly valid equity concerns about how that could be implemented as well. Even speed limit reductions, that's a very challenging area that you tend to get a lot of resistance on. Reforming parking policies, another very sensitive area. So I think the only point we're trying to make here is that, although high-cost transit expansion projects, for example, have a lot of merits to them, when we're focused on those GHG reductions, it's much more about making the existing transit that we have easier to use, as opposed to, building significant new rail lines that are really going to help us get to those GHG targets. This is a complicated slide, so I won't tend to spend too much time on it, but in the spirit of what Dan Sperling was talking about, this isn't easy. When you look at our previous plan, our Plan Bay Area 2040, which was only adopted in 2017, we had a 15% per capita GHG emission reduction target, which when we applied sort of updated assumptions for the new planning cycle, that 15% achievement went all the way down to 4%. So basically, almost everything that we were doing just 4 years ago was no longer sufficient, given how assumptions had changed, how conditions had changed. As we went through the process, our sort of first iteration of a suite of strategies, we fell well short of hitting the target. So with this latest iteration, our final blueprint and our draft plan, we had to pursue much more aggressive strategies, and we think that this suite of strategies could get us up to a 22% reduction, although that's still subject to change. And we'll find out more with the final plan. Another key thing that I want to note here is that 22%, it does only reflect what we as MTC can sort of take credit for under how the state calculates GHG reductions. Overall, when you look at all of the strategies and you include state and federal tailpipe emissions regulations and standards, that target actually, or that reduction is much closer to 50%. So, we think a significant amount. In terms of transitioning, from this planning to implementation, I did want to just, note that as the project manager for the implementation plan, we're really looking at what concrete, tangible things can we do in the next 1 to 5 years to advance these 35 strategies? And what our draft implementation plan did is that it really looked at all of those 35 strategies, and for each, it really tried to assess what are the success factors? How can we succeed in implementing these strategies? So it looked at where we as an agency stand in terms of our authority, our financial resources, our technical capacity, whether there's public and political support for the strategy, and then tried to identify an appropriate implementation role for us, whether we should lead, partner, or support other entities in that space. And partnership has been a very, very important element of what we're trying to do here, that this isn't something that we can do alone. There's the state, there's local jurisdictions, there's our transit operators, there's environmental and equity nonprofits and advocates, there's labor, the business community. It's really all sectors need to be pushing forward to help us achieve these goals. In terms of some of the specific things that we're trying to push forward in the next 1 to 5 years, obviously there's a need for revenues to support our complete streets and Vision Zero priorities and our electrification needs. But I think, importantly, we do have some existing programs, such as our climate initiatives program or our operational transit demand management programs, and these really need to scale up quite a bit in the next few years in order to achieve our goals. So that's something that we're really looking to do, is to try to restructure these programs to make sure that they can achieve the vision that we've articulated. We're going to be pursuing a robust planning study to see how we can advance all lane tolling, which we're calling our next generation freeway study, and that will involve input from a whole variety of stakeholders and partner and the public. Our regional active transportation plan, first ever regional active transportation plan, we're looking to wrap up that process in the next year, and that will sort of articulate how can we get to this vision of a 10,000 mile regional trails network and multi-use paths network. And also on the housing side, emphasizing the land use importance, trying to work with our existing programs to provide technical assistance and financial resources to our local jurisdictions to ensure that they can do the planning that they need to help us accommodate these land use changes that we need to pursue in order to achieve our goals. And with that, as I mentioned, we're going to be looking to adopt this plan. Our commission executive board will be looking to consider adoption this October. And from there, we'll be transitioning to pushing forward with the implementation activities for all of these different areas. And with that, I am happy to stop sharing.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation, Chirag. So with that, I would love to introduce our next speaker, Jovanka Beckles, who is the AC Transit Board Director. She was elected in November 2020 to serve on the AC Transit Board of Directors and worked as a counselor, youth educator, team builder, and strategist for the homeless community, as well as a mental health specialist for 32 years. She's also been a small business owner in the city of Richmond and has served her community as the Richmond City Council member for 8 years. Currently, she's active in numerous community organizations and is committed to working with riders and workers to build a universally accessible, emission-free transit system that the public deserves. So I would love to welcome Jawanka anytime you're ready.
Thank you so very much, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this session. It's so important, that we address climate change in all the ways that, in all the ways that we are able to take responsibility and play a role in making sure that we have a sustainable planet. So thank you. I think what I'd like to do is just to first of all remind us that public transit is in jeopardy, and we need to do all that we can do to protect people's ability to move about freely, to get to their appointments, medical doctors' appointments, school, work. Most importantly, we need to get people out of their cars to protect our planet. We need to also, I believe, first and foremost, elect people who are committed to that effort, because without the policies, we're pretty much screwed, right? If we don't have people who are committed to saving the planet and transit justice, then we're not going to get anywhere. So I'm really proud to be on the AC Transit Board, and I'm really proud to be serving my community in that capacity. Thank you so much for all of you who are working hard to that effort. The AC Transit staff, transit justice organizations, and transit activists. Thank you all. A little bit about AC Transit and where we are and what we're doing to that effort. I believe we're back to 83% of the services as of August 9th. And we're doing a fare free transit on Fridays in the month of September. And these are all the ways that things that we're doing to bring riders back, to get people out of their cars. So in the month of September, we're going to be piloting a free Friday. So free transit free Fridays for everyone who wants to get on the bus. Just get on the bus and get to where you need to go. We're also, as a region, have started an all aboard Bay Area, which is a return to transit. Basically, it's a return to transit campaign that we're starting to see in the media. It's a partnership between the transit operators and MTC, where our latest ridership numbers has shown that we have a 12% bump in ridership from last week to this week, which is excellent. So people are starting to get back on the bus. And as you all know, because of COVID, ridership had actually had dwindled, but we're doing everything that we can do, not only to bring ridership back to where it was pre-pandemic, but also we just need to, once again, get folks out of their cars. We went from 70,000 to 78,000 daily riders in 1 week. That's wonderful. Due to the start of schools, we're having more trans-based service. People are getting back to work, so we need to have those buses reinstated. There are some recommendations that came out of the Blue Ribbon Task Force as well, including a focus on fare coordination, integration, and network management, and that transit agencies would develop some type of transit equity principles. We absolutely have to stop any austerity measures and fight for more funding, especially from regional, state, and federal agencies. One of the things that I'm really proud of is that AC Transit did not cut any, reduce our operators, so there were no layoffs. And again, that came as a result of a movement from transit activists to ensure that that doesn't happen. We have to demand that the super rich and corporations like Uber and Lyft, we have to demand that they pay their fair share of taxes, so that this money can go towards building a better transit system, where we can either have reduced or a fare-free system. And a fare-free system really is not some kind of fairy tale dream. It can happen, and it is happening in some parts of the world. And so I believe that in the fifth largest economy in the world, we can absolutely afford a fare-free system. Although, and I may get to that a little bit later, although there are a little pushback from some of the drivers who feel that a fare-free system would make it really difficult for them to control who comes on the bus. But I believe that there's so many different ways that we can address that concern. First of all, we can make sure that everyone is housed, and we don't have to worry about people who are unsheltered riding the bus as a way to achieve shelter and warmth and some comfort and some stability. So once we address that, and I know that's a different panel, I believe that we can really have a fare-free system that benefits everyone. One of the let's see. I also believe that education is key when we're talking about a fare-free system. We educate the public on why this is good for everyone, for the environment, why this is good for getting people out of their cars. And that's something that I'll be working with along with my fellow transit activists. One of the other things that we're working on in AC Transit is that we've all purchases need to be at zero emissions starting in 2029, and we have a mandate to be fully zero emission by 2040. Of course, you all know the world is on fire. I really believe that we really have to work towards lowering that goal. 2040 is a long way from today, when we're seeing so many parts of the world on fire, including California. So AC Transit is really committed to reducing that time frame. And so right now we have 24 zero emission buses. We're very proud of that. Some of our older legacy fuel cells have gone down, but we have 2 new battery electric buses on property, but we haven't formally accepted them yet. And by accepted, I mean it's just they're sort of sitting there. So we'll be working on that. So they're not necessarily counted as part of the fleet that we have, but we are going to start seeing delivery of a new batch of 40 buses at the end of this year. I think by the end of next year, we should have about 66 new zero emission buses. If we don't have any more of the older buses, that are just, out of commission. I also want to just talk a little bit about how we know that AC Transit serves a lower income communities, people who can't afford to buy cars. So that's another important factor that I think that is that we need to address, right? And AC Transit is absolutely a vital public good for the East Bay's working class. Our riders are predominantly on low income. 75% of our riders are people of color. Many are students. So it's essential to connect. This is essential to connecting with our diverse riders, getting them to their jobs in schools and healthcare and grocery stores, et cetera. At the same time, taking cars off the streets, keeping our carbon footprint down. Footprint down. I want to get back a little to the fare-free aspect of this. I think that they're talking about the pros and cons of a fare-free system in getting ridership up again. and how do we pay for that? Because that's often a question that people ask. Well, how are we going to pay for it? And I alluded to that earlier when I mentioned that it's simple. You demand that the rich pay their fair share of taxes. Simple. But also at the federal level, obtaining those grants that are coming down the pipeline would be an effective way as well. And we do have some representatives in Congress who are really down for that. They are they're proponents of a fair free system, like Ayanna Pressley, who has a bill that she is trying to get passed so that transit agencies who will commit to a fair free system would be able to be provided with these grant monies to ensure that that happens. So we fund these by taxing corporations. We fund them by taxing the super rich in order for us to put our transit systems at the center of a green economic recovery. That's a word that we hear often, just a Green New Deal. Well, if we are able to pass the Green New Deal, we would be able to have these funding to be able to fix our infrastructure as well as our transit system, taxing Uber, Lyft, taxing Chevron, making sure that they, the billions that they're making in annual profits go towards their taxes and programs like a fair free system.
Just a reminder, Javanka, about a minute more, and
I have a minute?
Yes.
Okay, great. So let me see, just also then with the minute that I have, I do want to talk about just really quickly people with disabilities, that our agency is really committed to ensuring that people have access who are mobility challenged. So we have at-stop schedules and fair information. Our buses, our bus stops are ADA accessible. All of our vehicles are ADA accessible. Our bus stops are stopping closer for seniors. And we also have voice activated instructions and instructions at our stop. So, all right, I'll stop there, and folks have questions. Happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you again, Javanka. That was wonderful. And I think segues perfectly into our next speaker as well. And there's just so much to unpack there. We can dedicate a lot more time to the issues that you brought up. So thank you for that. I'm very excited to introduce Jen Guitart, who is part of the California Bicycle Coalition, and it currently serves as the development director there. She's been raising money for social justice organizations for the past 2 decades, and she holds an MA in anthropology from NYU, currently lives and rides her bike in the city of Berkeley here with her partner and both her kids. And when she's not working to make California better and more bikeable, she enjoys doing creative projects and playing music, and obviously informing all of us about these important issues with the CEMTF. So without further ado, Jen, I'm more than happy to pass it on over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusra. I really appreciate the bio. I actually had written a different one for this event, but I guess you didn't get that one. That's okay. I'm really excited to see how many people are talking about biking and walking in the chat. I'm going to share my screen real quick. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the critical importance of thinking beyond EVs in sustainable transportation, and a few ideas and strategies for promoting a more rapid transition to more biking and walking. Dan talked a little bit about this earlier, and this is from the Air Resources Board, but 40% of our emissions in greenhouse gas emissions in California come from the transportation sector. And if you count refineries and oil extraction and production, it's actually even more. And the great majority of that is from cars and SUVs. So that's basically a 4,000-pound vehicle to transport a 100 to 200 or more pound person. obviously very inefficient. And while we have seen a little bit of progress in reducing transportation emissions, it's very, very slow. And as Dan mentioned, vehicle miles traveled is continuing to rise. So while obviously vehicle electrification, car electrification is really, really important and the #1 strategy that will bring down those emissions, and it's absolutely essential, and I'm very glad that people are working on this, it's actually also insufficient. Even the most optimistic projections for our adoption of EVs are showing that we're just not transitioning fast enough to avoid a climate crisis or total climate catastrophe. EVs still use 8 metric tons of CO2 to manufacture and 2 metric tons per year of CO2 to operate. So we cannot drive ourselves out of the climate crisis, much as we wish that we could, because then it seems like an easy solution. And there are 2 reasons for this. One is that, as Dan mentioned, it's the longevity issue. Cars last for a long time. So a lot of cars on the road now and that people are purchasing today in the next few years will still be on the road for a long, long time. The other issue is inclusion. And, you know, electric vehicles, obviously, if we're mostly selling Teslas, that's a problem. Lower income people increasingly have to travel really long distances as they're being displaced. And they tend to need to rely on older used cars because of the expense of the initial expense of purchasing. And I know there are some great programs to get EVs into the hands of lower income people. And that's great. But low-income communities, by and large, have the most to gain from investments in biking, walking, transit, and affordable housing. And so if we're going to include disadvantaged communities in the transition to a clean energy, clean transportation future, we really need to include other strategies and invest in other strategies besides electric vehicles. So what else can we do? Well, I'll talk really briefly. I know the focus of this panel is on, or of this whole event is on local action. And at CalBike, we work at the state level. So I'm just going to really briefly kind of give you a sense of some of the things that we're working on right now. What we do is that we push for more, we sort of try to create the conditions for better local policies and make it easier for localities to have more biking and walking. So some of the things we do are increasing state level funding for bike walk infrastructure, more inclusive decision making, so pushing for disadvantaged communities to be represented on the California Transportation Commission, that sort of thing, and better laws for equitable, healthy, prosperous communities through biking. Some of the things we're working on right now are a couple of racial justice laws that would reduce pretextual policing opportunities. One is to decriminalize jaywalking. Another is to decriminalize using a stop sign as a yield sign. Then we're also working on more funding. We're always working on more funding for bike infrastructure, and particularly bike infrastructure in disadvantaged communities. And then we recently got $10 million in a statewide e-bike subsidy program, because e-bikes bicycles are the cleanest vehicle of all, and e-bikes are a great way to replace car trips. Let's see. So what can we do on the local level? On the local level to support biking, it's really important to support local advocacy groups. And a lot of you, I think, are from a lot of those local advocacy groups, but making sure that you're participating in biking, walking, transit, and housing advocacy, joining those groups as members, and also volunteering and, engaging with them on efforts to lobby your local city council people. A lot of decisions about transportation policy and a lot of funding decisions and funding actually come at the local and regional level. So while we can do our best at the state level, I think a lot of the really important work is happening at the local level. Also, just like, you know, I think that I wanted to emphasize a little bit of what I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name, but the Plan Bay Area, Chirag's presentation talked about, which is the importance of housing. I think people don't often think of housing as a mobility issue, but it's actually one of the best things that we can do to reduce transportation emissions in California is to have more affordable housing so that people don't have to drive as far, commute as far to their jobs. And I'm going to just really quickly talk about one resource that we've created at CalBike and that you can use in your local communities to get more bike infrastructure on the ground really quickly. And that is our Quick Build. So for those of you who don't know what Quick Build is, it's a way of building bike infrastructure that's obviously quick and also a lot cheaper than traditional bike plan or traditional bike projects. A lot of times, as you probably know, the planning process can take many years, and it can just be really frustrating how slowly cities move to get bike infrastructure and walking infrastructure into the ground. So Quick Build is a way of cutting short that planning process, and part of it is because the way that they're able to sort of, you know, have it be much faster is that a lot of these projects are put in as temporary projects or pilot projects. And that's actually really great for inclusion and sort of from an equity perspective and just getting community feedback. It's much better to have a temporary bike lane thrown in where people can see it and they can, you know, interact with it and use it and then give feedback rather than trying to show people a PowerPoint presentation and getting them to come to a community meeting. So it's actually a very interactive way to get people's feedback and participation on bike planning. It's also just really cheap because you're using really cheap materials like cheap plastic bollards, paint, planters, water-filled bollards, that kind of thing. So yeah, so we actually have this wonderful, if you go to calbike.org/quickbuild, we have this 4-page brochure that's designed really for local elected officials and for local advocates to use to educate their city elected officials about Quick Build and to kind of quickly introduce how it works, how to get funding for it, why it's preferable, and why it's like a great solution right now when a lot of city coffers are emptier than usual, and there are a lot more people out there biking, and there's a need for this bike infrastructure now, not in 10 years. In addition to this 4-page brochure that's really intended for advocates and city officials, we also worked with Alta Planning and Design to put together a 77-page guide that's very detailed, that really tells engineers how to, it's kind of like offers step-by-step really, you know, all the materials and the whole process, and gives city staff a guide to be able to actually put in this infrastructure. And all those materials are available for free on our website. We're happy to also send you a paper version of the Quick Build brochure if you want to be able to educate your policymaker at a meeting or whatever, hand it directly to them. So yeah, we encourage you to check that out. And thank you very much. Thank you, Yusra, and thanks everyone. And there's my contact information if anyone wants to learn more or wants that guide.
Wonderful. And we'll take note of that as well, so that if any of you have questions for Jen or any of our panelists who have gone, you can always feel free to ask them about that. But thank you, Jen, for that. That was very insightful. And hopefully, you know, again, the discussions are very active. So we encourage that to keep going as we introduce our final speaker for this portion of the panel, Peter Miller, who is part of the San Francisco Taxi Workers Alliance. He has been a member of the executive board of the San Francisco Taxi Workers Alliance, as well as a San Francisco Labor Council delegate representing taxi workers in the local area. He currently serves on the Labor Council's Committee or subcommittee on climate action. He graduated from SFSU with a bachelor's degree in geography and a dual concentration in natural resources management and geographic informational analysis. So we have someone who can really help wrap up this conversation, and I'm incredibly excited to pass it on over to Peter. Feel free to go ahead.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I also play the ukulele and the tenor banjo, and I ride a blue 62 Schwinn American. So I'm going to try and talk about this in 10 minutes. Taxis are such a complicated issue that it really takes a while for people to absorb it. So I'm going to do the best, I'm going to cut the best path through this that I can in 10 minutes, but it's like a web. There are a lot of intertwined issues, and there are many paths through this. I may use the term TNCs. TNC is a transportation network company. It is the designation that the CPUC gives to Uber. And I also need to point out that I'm speaking from the perspective of a San Francisco taxi driver. Taxi regulations vary by city and county. And so while the concepts are generally the same, the specifics may be different in different places. The most important thing that I want people to take from this talk is that we have to limit the number of vehicles on the street to prevent catastrophic climate change and to improve workers' rights. There are way too many vehicles on the street. There don't have to be that many, and that is actually the basis of the taxi regulations. So I want to talk about that a little bit, but limiting the numbers, because the CPUC controls Uber and Lyft, it has to be done at the state level. We need a state legislation to reduce the number of vehicles on the road. But the taxi regulations started around the time of the Great Depression because there was chaos on the streets. Anybody who wanted to could go out and be a taxi driver, and people realized that they needed to regulate the industry so that the streets were safer and so that people could make decent wages. This is how we ended up with the medallion system. Many large cities have medallion systems, and the purpose of the medallion is to limit the number of vehicles on the street. One medallion, one taxi. And right now, it's important to note in terms of just transportation, one of the most important things that needs to be done for San Francisco taxi drivers is taxi drivers who bought taxi medallions in San Francisco need a refund. For 40 years, we had an incredibly progressive taxi system where taxi medallions were earned by taxi drivers. It was kind of like earning your pension. And in 2010, Muni was operating at a deficit, and the city decided to start selling taxi medallions for $250,000 a pop. And the people who bought those are now going into foreclosure and bankruptcy, and they need a refund. It is absolutely not fair to the workers. But the taxi medallion system makes sense because it's a way to control the number of vehicles on the street. Problem with Uber is that there's just no cap on the numbers. When Uber came in, they broke the system by flooding the streets with taxi cabs. And it's really important to point out that Uber was successful not because they created an app, but because they broke the rules and flooded the streets with cabs and made it absolutely, so easy to get a cab because they're everywhere all of a sudden. And I'm going to refer to Ubers as cabs from time to time in this because I think that they're the same thing. They are vehicles providing taxi services. The reason why they are not regulated as taxi cab is because of a sketchy decision by a CPUC administrative law judge that said because Uber is using an app that they aren't a taxi when they are clearly providing taxi services. Taxis are kind of like a fishery. We can think of it as a natural resource management issue. Taxi medallions, they're like commercial salmon licenses, which limit the strain on the ecosystem and ensure that it's sustainable and that it doesn't get overfished. So the salmon are okay. And so fishermen or fisher people can make incomes. The taxis are limited for really good reasons. And while taxi service should be reliable, there is a scarcity of taxis also because it shouldn't be so easy to get a cab that you're now competing with the bus. and the service gets abused and stop people taking the bus. People should take taxis before they take Ubers, but you should walk or bike or take the bus first. So Uber is successful because they flooded the streets with too many vehicles. And this is an environmental justice issue because Uber is a monument to inefficiency. They spend so much time driving around empty that they're basically idling all the time. There are all these unnecessary pollutants that are going into the air because they're driving around empty all the time. The taxi system, and what we need to get back to, is making it so that there are just enough vehicles on the road that they're full all the time and they're not driving around empty. And this helps keep workers' rights up because there isn't an oversupply of taxis. And it's imperative for climate change because it gets the emissions down. I need to respectfully disagree with Dan Sperling's comments in his keynote speech. Uber did not pioneer this space, at least not alone. Taxis were developing apps at the same time as Uber, and they launched apps within months. They were on the streets as well. Apps and micromobility would have happened without Uber, and they should have happened under the guidance of local transportation planners. This can still happen. Uber has shown us how not to do it. And there are studies that show that Uber Pool still increases vehicle miles traveled. I would direct people to studies done by Bruce Schaller and the San Francisco Local Agency Formation Commission for more information on that. And I may kind of jump around. I might throw out some bullet points here because I want to plant seeds in people's heads so that we have things to talk about later. Taxis are kind of like fair trade where Uber is free trade. Uber stated in its IPO filing it intends to compete with public transportation. We need local control of taxi services. Local control of public transportation is the way things should be. In San Francisco, taxis are part of the public transit system under the city charter. We have access to transit lanes. Taxis are kind of like a public partnership with the city. We are regulated by the same agency that regulates buses and streetcars. So I want to talk about the need for taxis. There's always going to be a need for taxis. Taxis supply first mile and last mile services. They are crucial for senior and disabled people, where it's not about first mile, last mile, but as a mobility justice issue, it's about door-to-door transportation. Sometimes taxis are just important in emergencies. Maybe somebody has too many groceries to get them on the bus, or drunk people, right? Sometimes we just need a way to get people home where they don't go and jump into a car. Taxis should be fitted with bike racks, all of them. Taxis provide the bulk of paratransit service in San Francisco, so we are crucial to the mobility of seniors and the disabled. And SF has the greenest taxi fleet in the United States. This is something that workers fought for. Workers wanted to have hybrid vehicles, and this was implemented, I think, around 2010. The next step that we need to take is to electrify the taxi system. Training is a really important thing to look at. Taxi drivers used to be trained much more. In order to be a taxi driver, it required a week of training to start driving. Unfortunately, in San Francisco, our regulators have decreased the requirement to drive a cab to about a day. And they have done this in order to keep us competitive with Uber and Lyft. Because there is no training to be an Uber and Lyft driver, the barrier to entry is so low that in order for taxis to remain competitive, they have drastically dropped the training requirements. And this is something that needs to change. It needs to go back up. But the real thing that makes taxi drivers—
Just to note,
yes.
Just for about 2 minutes left.
Okay, so I'm gonna kind of jump ahead then to what we can do since we're running out of time here. We need to cap the number of vehicles on the street. New York City has already done this, so there is precedent. We need to do it here. It would be best if we returned local control of taxi services to local transit agencies. This includes Uber and Lyft, so planners can determine the necessary amount of vehicles on the street to provide climate-friendly service. We can incentivize people to take cabs by giving them privileged access to the city, just like buses. We need to create more living wage jobs so that people don't need to work for Uber and Lyft in order to survive. I would like people to support Rideshare Drivers United. They are the only rideshare group that I know of that supports a cap on the number of vehicles on the street. And they get along with taxi drivers in New York and Los Angeles, and we're beginning to work with them in San Francisco. Anything that raises operating expenses for Uber is good for taxi drivers. It's good for rideshare drivers as well. Require better benefits for rideshare drivers. Transportation planners need better access to data so they can better understand the impacts of traffic on the street and plan accordingly. We need to look at our airports. If we can't do things at the state level, we can try to do them at the local level. Airports have a tremendous amount of independence over their operations. And we could require, equitable regulations for taxis and TNCs in order to operate at the airport. In San Francisco, the San Francisco airport is actually banning senior cabs from operating at the airport in order to mitigate the effect of wages on workers due to the oversupply of Ubers. This has got to stop. I want to end by saying that taxis should be Green New Deal jobs. We should be electrifying our taxi systems, making taxi drivers municipal employees. AB 5 and Prop 22 failed to do this with Uber and Lyft. We can do it at the local level with taxi workers and have a just transportation system. So if you can't walk, if you can't bike or take the bus, grab a cab. Thank you very much.
That is a wonderful way to kind of finalize and wrap up this panel. Thank you once again, Peter. I truly appreciate that insightful presentation from you, and for the rest of our panelists, thank you as well. It's incredibly important that we have these conversations earlier, and especially as we're coming out of quite a difficult and unprecedented time, conversations like these are incredibly important to have.
Amos, do you want to introduce the panel, or should we just turn it over to Elena to get going here?
I thought we were taking a break. I didn't know we were.
Okay. Well,
I guess that means we're back from break, everybody. If you're
break,
back,
so.
I knew. I guess I was looking for an acknowledgement there, but we could have a little banner and chatter. But no, I hope everybody's doing well. Get a glass of water or something for yourself if you haven't thought to do so. And when you do come back from a bio break or from a good stretch, we are getting going. But again, this is the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force. This is our second year of this summit series, our second virtual summit series that we've been putting on, our United Actions for an Environmentally Just and Regenerative Future. We started in 2019 as a band of folks who were very concerned and met up in Richmond, over 56 people. And today we are presenting, if you will, in our second year, our fourth summit. And this one being on clean and just transportation, if you've joined us anywhere from our start. We're now moving into our second panel that we will hear on electrification of transportation. This one is facilitated by Elena Engel of 350 Bay Area on their transportation team. On her panel, she'll introduce to you today Carleen Cullen of Drive Clean Bay Area, Lily Cohen with No New Gas Campaign, Tim Sassine of Ballard Power Systems, and Dr. Giltal with Electric Vehicle Center. With that, Elena, if you are on board, please take it away.
Hi, all. So our first speaker will be Carleen Cullen. She is the founder and the executive director of Cool the Earth, a nonprofit that has motivated over 500,000 families to reduce their carbon footprint, and the Drive Clean Bay Area collaborative of 75 cities, NGOs, and agencies educating and motivating drivers to make their next car electric. She's honored to have served as policy advisor for electrifying transportation during Governor Newsom's gubernatorial campaign. Carlene?
Nice to meet you all. Thanks, Elena. Yeah, when I was serving with for Governor Newsom, then Governor-elect Newsom, for how we move California forward to really move off of fossil fuels for transportation, my primary policy advice was that we should ban the internal combustion engine vehicle by 2030. As I'm sure you all know, he announced a ban for 2035, which is terrific. Frankly, not soon enough, but still sends very important signals to the marketplace. One of the things that I discovered in doing the deep research for a year and a half working for the governor is that consumers are really not able to keep up with the rapid advancements in this marketplace, and that there were misperceptions that had not kept up with in electric vehicles, with the range and the costs and the type of vehicles that were available and the charging, et cetera. And so I just thought about, well, let's start this collaboration. We started in Bay Area, and we actually are in the middle of a name change and an expansion, both in terms of our geographic reach as well as the what we are advancing. So we are now moving to Ride and Drive Clean, which is encompassing other alternatives to driving gas cars, which includes e-mobility, transit, active transportation, et cetera. We also are launching a national program with the U.S. League of Women Voters and the International Rotary, so reaching into a lot of different groups. And I wanted to speak specifically about things that cities and activists and local NGOs can do to address equity issues as we move towards electrifying transportation. One of the things this collaboration offers, like Elena said, there's right now 75 different entities, cities, agencies, et cetera, is educational workshops, free educational workshops. We address not only those who live in single family homes and who can afford a new EV, but also those in multi-unit, disadvantaged communities, low-income communities, how you might buy a used vehicle. So they're very comprehensive. Our collaboration also offers bilingual financial workshops. Most consumers are unaware of the financial incentives, the numerous financial incentives from the state, local, state, and federal level that are available to purchase an EV, a new or used EV, as well as, of course, we're excited about the new e-bike incentives as well. From a city and NGO and activist perspective, this collaboration, we invite everybody to share these free workshops. We also, one of our partners offers in-person events where we have new and used EVs that people can come talk to drivers, et cetera, COVID permitting it, of course. So what can cities and local groups do? One of the first things is organize. So I am part of what we call a Marin Sonoma EV Squad, and we have worked together. We meet bi-weekly. One of our first objectives was to work with cities to get them to implement AB 1236, which was passed several years ago and is all about streamlining EV charging infrastructure. If you look at the map of the state, you'll see that there are many regions that are not in compliance. And we found that working with councils and staff as local residents and stating that we really wanted to see our local jurisdictions enact AB 1236, that pretty rapidly we were able to bring almost every jurisdiction into compliance. So that's fantastic. And our group actually got an award from the governor's GoBiz office for being successful at this. So I'd really encourage you all to just show up at a council meeting, talk about the importance of passing this, adhering to this. Specifically around equity and EVs. One of the things that we hear a lot is that driving an electric vehicle can save you money because the electricity is lower cost than gasoline. This is true if you can plug in at home. It is not necessarily true if you can't plug in at home. So our low-income communities and disadvantaged communities who might live in multi-unit or might not have electrical systems that can accommodate EV charging are going to be left with paying the most expensive prices for electricity. It's a really serious equity issue and something that we need to address. We have some proposals that we are working with at the state level, but we also think that at a city level and at the advocacy level, this needs to be addressed from many different levels. One of the initiatives that we are putting forth before the governor's office and the California Energy Commission and CARB is that there's a new rebate program established to incentivize property owners, multi-unit property owners, to install 120, mostly, could be 240 volt outlets at parking stalls. So if there are parking stalls with that multi-unit, that there's a rebate program incentivize in existing buildings to bring charging out, to bring outlets where people can just plug in their car, even if it's at the slow overnight charge, that they can do that. There's new technologies called smart outlets that are coming in the market that are in beta testing that will accommodate the billing. So if people can plug in at home, they can then pay a much lower price for their fuel. Additionally, we are advocating that the new public charging infrastructure, and also going back to the installed base, allows people who have low priced electricity at home, so packages such as CARE and FARA, that they can essentially travel with that discounted rate at the public station. Because once again, if I'm paying a low price at home, and why should I be charged the maximum price when I'm charging on the road? Because typically I don't have charging at home if I'm in multi-unit in low income or disadvantaged communities. So it's a pretty major change. We're actually involved with the in the reconciliation and the Biden infrastructure plan, that we really want to see monies go towards these sorts of things so that people in our low income communities who are charging at public stations are able to get the lowest price. And it seems like a big project, but I know that, I can go to the Shell gas station and put in a code for my Safeway grocery store account and get a discounted price. This isn't unreasonable. It really has to happen. And we also want to see monies allocated for innovative approaches. I know in Los Angeles, there's street pole and utility pole charging stations. They're not without some of their problems, but there are lots of innovations for curbside charging. And so we're really looking for how do we provide more access and cost appropriate access. People in single family homes should not be paying less than people who have to charge on the road if they are in low income and disadvantaged communities. And the final thing that can be advocated for, there are many other things, but at the kind of local and regional level, is that, for instance, the Clean Cars for All program, it's great. It's for people in disadvantaged communities, but there's this really big gap for people who are in low income communities, not necessarily in the traditional disadvantage, where the incentive programs are for federal tax credits, rebates that are after the fact. This kind of middle of the market of the low income really does not have enough financial incentives for new or used vehicles. They're really left behind in this market. So there's a lot of things cities can do regarding this. I'd be happy to connect with anybody about some of these issues. I see a note in the chat. Yes, I should mention that if people at a workplace, definitely advocate that workplaces also install charging, because that's a major opportunity as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Carlene. I'm hoping we'll have a little time for questions at the end. We'll see how it all turns out. Our next speaker is Lily Cohn. She is an environmental engineering student at Humboldt State University. She works directly with 350 Bay Area's mobilizing team to create change in her community. She's actively involved in a lawsuit against Costco and her local city council for trying to build a 28 pump gas station on pristine wetlands in Novato. Lily?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lily. I'm here in Humboldt. So sorry if the internet connection's a little bad. So that's probably why I'm going to turn off my camera and just show you my slides. Let's see. Let me pull that up. So today I'm just here to talk to you guys about my fight against Costco and the local city council, and hopefully getting other city councils to be free from the hold of Costco. So to start, I am a 22-year-old environmental engineering student. As you just heard, I'm a team lead with 350 Bay Area, and I'm an assistant project manager with TSF Group. And my team is a group of locals from across the Bay Area, including many from my town of Novato. So the issue, well, Costco proposed to Novato a 28 pump gas station over by the already existing warehouse. You can see in the image here where they're proposing to put the gas station location, which is right next to a nature preserve and also the San Pablo Bay Marsh Inlet. So, I mean, the main problem with that obviously is that they're trying to place a gas station next to sensitive ecosystems. And this picture here is actually the diagram that they made to look like the what the gas station will actually look like in the end. And I just wanted to show you guys a little bit of what the ecological preserve looks like. I think it just kind of gives a better perspective, and also just getting an understanding that migrating birds live here, and this is kind of an essential resource that we have. So why is this problematic? Well, Costco portrays itself as a sustainable company. They have a web page specifically talking about their sustainability principles, along with a climate action plan to reduce carbon emissions, which obviously you can't do if you're building gas stations. Second is, in this case, there's a high water table. So when you look at that nature preserve, you'll see that there's a lake or small pond right there, which kind of shows you where the water level is for the soil. And with high water levels, that actually creates corrosion of the pipes for the gas tanks, as well as soft soil that could be damaged in an earthquake for the equipment. Lastly, there's air and water contamination, which gas stations emit benzene fumes, which has no safe levels of exposure, which is important to know. And I think a great fact that I actually learned about for water contamination with gas stations is that a 10-gallon spill of petroleum can contaminate up to 12 million gallons of groundwater. And a typical gas station, meaning something smaller than the one that is proposed, dispensing 1 million gallons per year, spills about 70 to 100 gallons of gasoline. Additionally, the Novato City Council ended up actually signing a climate emergency resolution in November of 2020, but continued to proceed with the project, which is unfortunate. But Costco also made threats to the Novato City Council, saying that if they don't implement the gas station, that Costco was threatening to leave, which for the city is quite a big threat, because Costco is a huge tax income, big motivator for that. So, but I also wanted to show that we aren't the only ones. So there's people all across the Bay Area, California, and even across the United States that are currently trying to fight Costco gas stations from being approved in their towns. So our fight, okay. So in April of 2020, Costco actually ended up applying for the permits to build the gas station. And in September 2020, my local group of 350 Marin helped to create a petition to stop that construction. February 2021, we ended up doing a community protest out in front of Costco. And then March 2021, we got, unfortunately, the gas station proposal was passed by the city council. And that is why in April of 2021, we ended up filing a lawsuit against Costco and the city council. So here you can just see a little bit of the news press that we got from local sources, as well as the New Yorker, thanks to Bill McKibben, who's one of the largest environmentalists, who I guess in modern history, he created 350.org, and I was very appreciative because he gave us some national recognition. And so our fight really wasn't that easy, and for many reasons. One is that the city council members, when I tried setting up meetings with them, a few of them actually refused to speak to me until I kind of pressured them into it. And they were like, oh, okay. And another thing that you kind of have to do in these public hearings is making sure you're saying the right thing and also getting expert testimony. So if you want to have a lawsuit case, you need to make sure that you're saying scientifically led facts rather than opinions, general opinions. Lastly, I would say the struggle was, the time wasn't really on our side. So it ended up being only a few weeks in which they ended up making the final decision making for the process. So, and I just wanted to clarify that a lawsuit does not mean that we get no gas station. It's just simply requesting Costco to get a full environmental impact report, because unfortunately it isn't required to do that. So Costco ended up only filing a mitigated negative declaration, which is a minimal analysis of the environmental impact. And with this, we would be able to get more time to potentially get a different decision and different city council members to vote no. So taking action. After this whole thing, I ended up creating a website and a campaign called No New Gas, and it's at nonewgas.com. This website is supposed to be a collaboration between environmental and social justice organizations to help fight new gas infrastructure. So our key focuses really are on local voices, networking between the environmental and social justice organizations, bringing corporate responsibility, and then having toolkits to teach our community what ways we can actually stop these gas stations. So the current toolkit I have up right now on our website is to write letters and emails to Costco CEO to let them know that they should follow up on, you know, their sustainability leadership commitments, because building gas stations is quite the opposite for if you want to reduce your emissions. And then obviously I've got lots of upcoming projects, but the blue squares are just things that are at the beginning stages that I have going on right now. The red is things that are almost ready to get uploaded, just need a little bit of work. And then we have things in the green boxes, which are things that are kind of actively going right now, which as you can see, there's a lot, but I'll talk about a few. So for electing the new city council members, there's two new city council members or two city council member re-elections in the upcoming year of 2022. And it is very crucial that we try to find people who are climate advocates and that will really speak on behalf of the people. And I think a big problem with this is that my local community, at least I felt like when speaking to them, didn't really know about a lot of the local politics going on. And I think it's really key that we try to bring more awareness to that. And as for the art gallery idea, I kind of just wanted to mention this to people who potentially have artist friends or designers, because I was thinking, or my friend was giving me this idea that we should take the money in the space that we would originally think of for these gas stations, and how can we reinvest them into community-based programs like maybe this, just as an example, a solar community garden. And the last thing, just a little reason for hope, is that American Canyon, which is I guess up in more of the North Bay part, is a small town that is temporarily putting the brakes on new gas stations. And they are also in talks to permanently ban new gas stations. And as we can see, thanks to Petaluma, who was the first town to fully ban new gas stations, it's been getting news press from across the country and kind of across the world as well. And yeah, that's it for me. But if you have any questions, please email me, or also go to my website, nonewgas.com. Would be great, because I want to build that network and also try to get other organizations on board to create some solidarity. And check me out on LinkedIn. Thank you.
All right, Lily, thank you so much. And if you could stop sharing, that'll help us a little bit. Okay, our next speaker is Tim Sassine. He is the Market Development Manager for Ballard Power Systems. He started his work in hydrogen over 20 years ago, leading heavy-duty decarbonization projects across the fuel cell product life cycle in Ballard's engineering, commercial sales, and field service departments. Okay, Tim.
All right, thank you very much. Really happy to be here. This is a really sensitive subject for decarbonization and transportation. A lot of varied opinions, and in the hydrogen industry, we've got a lot of work to do to really show our value to the environmental justice community and the role that we can play to help accelerate decarbonization, as we all know we need to do. We've been in this game for a while. Ballard's been at this for 42 years. Jeffrey Ballard started this company with the goal of eliminating internal combustion engines. Obviously, we got a ways to go yet, but we found that we can hit the most difficult decarbonization sectors. In buses, we've been on the road for over 20 years. We're getting into trucks and trains and mining trucks, and those really difficult to decarbonize sectors. And up until recently, it's been a matter of getting the fuel cells so that the vehicles could be perfect, assuming ideal gas, because we know that hydrogen can be made and used completely without emissions. But now we really need to talk about the gas. We need to talk about the fuel, where it comes from, and how we use it. It's becoming a global phenomenon. There are 50 countries now with hydrogen strategies and roadmaps representing a large part of industry across the world. I apologize for this eye chart, but sufficient to say that lots of countries are jumping into this, Europe and Asia, to say who's the biggest. And in the US, we're no stranger to hydrogen. There's a lot of hydrogen already in the US. There's over 1,600 miles of hydrogen pipeline, which is a surprise to most everybody. And we've got deployments out and about all over the US. And we've got experience in dealing with this gas and moving it around and using it for heavy industry. But not all hydrogen comes from the same place. We've heard a lot of talk about different colors of hydrogen, different types of hydrogen. Hydrogen from natural gas is really the most onerous hydrogen that most people are very concerned about. And blue hydrogen, or hydrogen with carbon sequestration, marries that natural gas usage to a new technology that other concerns are raised about and is still not quite mature enough to really depend on. What we really talk about and what we want is hydrogen from truly zero emission sources. Suffice it to say, however, this is not different than the electricity question. We want electricity that comes from clean sources as well. And as we look across the United States, we see there's still a lot of work to do. Running an EV in Washington State is going to have a very different impact than running it in Kentucky, for example. And this is just to draw that parallel that what we're talking about is the source of that energy. Let's dive into this a little bit and have a bit of fun. One way to understand this is with the different colors of electricity. So brown or black electricity is electricity that comes from coal. It has high carbon content. We don't want it in California. Pink electricity comes from nuclear. That has no carbon, but it's got a waste stream, and therefore we don't want that in California either. Turquoise electricity from electrolysis or from incineration or pyrolysis has a variable content. That's like incineration, not what we're looking for. Gray electricity, that's good old natural gas. That's our baseline. We're only going to allow that for a little while. Natural gas with CCS, call it blue. Yellow from solar. Green from solar, wind, hydro, or biogenic. We use some of that, but for renewable, we don't use the large hydro. Is that useful? No, it's really not. It's confusing. And it draws my point, which is it's about the source. It's not about the electrons, and it's not about the H2 molecule either. We can think about this as we move renewable energy around. If we have wind, solar, or geothermal, we can put it on the grid as electricity and use it in battery electric vehicles, or we can turn it into hydrogen with electrolyzers, use it in fuel cell electric vehicles. Biogenic methane, which has gotten a lot of attention lately, or renewable natural gas, we can use in thermal power plants and put on the grid. And we do that a lot in CHP plants in California, or we can use steam methane reformation and turn it into hydrogen. The point here is that the real area of concern is that source. Whether or not you like biogenic methane or renewable natural gas really is a separate question than whether you want energy over the grid or with hydrogen. There's a lot of good reasons why we don't want to electrify everything with the grid. Equity is one of those. The cost of doubling the electrical and transmission grid has to be apportioned by the utilities. And it's going to be a tough job to get that right so that communities that aren't benefiting are not paying for it. Wildfire prevention is a huge one. Last year, over 25% more CO2 came from wildfires than from fossil fuel use. That's terrifying, and that's going to go on until our climate rights itself. Energy collection from remote renewables, hydrogen works very well without putting up new high tension lines, new electrical installations. If you're going for deserts or offshore wind, it's a great way to collect that electricity. It adds to resiliency because it's intrinsically storing energy. It frees truckers from infrastructure. You can't have a 1 megawatt recharger at home if you're an independent owner operator. Having fast public fueling stations is possible with hydrogen. Life cycle sustainability, very compatible with recyclability. I could go on and on about that. Land use, we can transport over the road, replace natural gas pipelines and not need to put in these new rights of way. Effective use of available funds. We need to use every option that we have. Long duration storage is talked a lot. Distributed control of power, not one entity can flip the switch. And we've seen both governmental and business entities acting with varying degrees of responsibility. We want it to be more democratic. And speed of deployment, every arrow in the quiver. So the question is, doesn't most hydrogen come from fossil fuel? Well, this chart from the Department of Energy shows sources on the left and uses on the right. And if you look on the left, holy crap, there it is. Yeah, it's mostly coming from natural gas and coal. And if you look over on the right, it's used for refining and ammonia. Talk about a basket of deplorables. This is awful. Well, let's look a little more closely for transportation. Now we're getting less than 0.3 million tons of hydrogen produced from renewables. But if you look on the other side, we're using less than 0.01 for transportation. And that's mostly coming from California, from the hydrogen that's being used for the projects here. Is this a problem or is this a decarb-opportunity? One area to look at is that refining area. So here's an example to kind of illustrate a way that we can use hydrogen to transition us over to zero carbon. So California used about 4 billion gallons of diesel in 2015. That's the newest number I could get. The way they use it is to pull out the sulfur, right? They take natural gas, they strip it and steam methane reforming that causes CO2, and they use that hydrogen for diesel. That makes about the same amount of CO2 as 8,000 Class 8 diesel trucks. That sucks. But there's something else we could do. We could get that hydrogen, from renewables. Let's get it from solar and wind. If we had about 560 megawatts of power, we could electrolyze it, make that same amount of hydrogen, and we would offset immediately that 8,000 truck worth of CO2 emissions. Well, wait a minute, we're not going to use diesel anymore. Diesel's awful. Yes. And we're going to taper off as well. So as we stop using diesel, now we've put in large scale hydrogen, green, carbon-free hydrogen, which becomes cheap at large scale. And we can taper that as we go down with diesel use, we go up with fuel cell truck use, and we end up reducing the emission equivalent of about 12,000 trucks. Well, that's pretty cool. And that's actually about 40% of what we need to do for the advanced clean truck regulation. Throw in another 6,000 battery electric trucks and we're there. And those would take about the same amount of power. And this is happening. It's happening all over the world. Up in Quebec, they're using hydropower to make hydrogen plug power. Our friendly competitors are making very large renewable hydrogen installations in New York, Washington, in Georgia. Lindy's building special green hydrogen production for industry. Air Liquide in Germany doing the same thing for refineries. Everfuel doing that as well. This is happening. It's happening today. And it's dropping the cost of hydrogen. And in fact, Secretary Granholm announced the DOE's, the first DOE Earthshot to get $1 per kilogram renewable, green, carbon-free hydrogen by the end of this decade. And it's achievable and it's doable. And it's something that we believe in, and it's our reason to be in business. We also want to draw a point. I want to just quickly talk about what we have to look towards, and that's embedded energy. As we talk about the full system, let's talk about beginning and end of life as well. And fuel cells, as I mentioned, have a very good recycling footprint and can actually reduce embedded carbon emissions through their use in fuel cell electric vehicles. So I just want to say that this work results not only from 40 years of hard work, but from a very diverse and inclusive group of individuals dedicated to decarbonization. And being based up in Vancouver, this just lends itself to a global multicultural community that's built this work. And we hope to participate in decarbonizing and helping with this important work. Thank you very much.
Tim, thank you. Okay. You can stop sharing. You can go back. Thank you. Our last speaker in this panel is Gil Tal. He's the director of the Plug-in Hybrid and Electric Vehicle Research Center at UC Davis. Dr. Tal is leading projects on the future need for electric vehicle infrastructure and the correlation between charging infrastructure, travel behavior, and the demand for EVs. Okay, Gil.
Great, thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for a great discussion. I don't think you can see me, maybe much better now. And thank you for a great discussion. I have to admit that during the discussion, I more or less dropped many of my slides and wrote to myself some notes about what I want to talk, because that was a very inspiring discussion. And I would like to start with something that I think Assembly Member Ting said, and also Professor Sperling was talking about, the urgency. And people asking me again and again when I'm talking about privately owned electric cars, okay, what about reducing VMT? What about electric bike? What about public transit and so on? And I think that the answer is very clear today. We need to push for 100% electrifying also including hydrogen of the light duty vehicles, all the cars that people own in the next 20 or 30 years. At the same time, we need to push for reducing VMT, for changing our transportation system. And we need to do both things like the other one is not exist. Not like we can find a way to not do one or the other, but just ignore the other side and push as hard as we can on both fronts. And I think that that's the level of urgency that we are at right now. And this is what we are doing. This is the slide that the California Air Resource Board their staff shared a couple of months ago about the legislation that we're expecting in California. that will push us from 10% EV market share, light duty EV market share today to 25% in more or less in 2026 and 76% 10 years from now, 100% less than 15 years from now. This is a very tall order. But even with this very tall order, we are still going to have so many more cars on the roads that will emit local pollution, will emit greenhouse gases, because the average lifetime of a car on the road in California is 12 to 14 years. And even if 100% of the cars will be sold in 2035 will be electric, it's still going to take a long time. Now, I want to say something about the chicken and the egg when it's come to pushing for higher market share. We're at 10% for the last 3 or 4 years, less than 10% for the last 3 or 4 years. When I started to work on electric car, it was very clear to us that we need to push the demand. We need to teach the owners. We need to educate people. We need to lower the price. We need to create strong incentives, subsidies, and then people will go and ask for electric cars, and then the car companies will build them. It is right now for us, the researcher, 100% clear that that's not the way it will work. The car companies will not make this car just because we really want them to make it. Furthermore, the owners will not look and buy these cars if they are not exist. You cannot push for a new product if you are not stocking the shelves first. No company start the advertisement without having a product. And that's what we were expecting that will happen with electric cars. We advertise, we talk about it, and we hope that that will stock the shelves. No, what CARB is doing, what I hope the federal government will do, is creating a binding, forcing mechanism to build these cars. And when the car companies will build these cars, we will help them, sell them, make the people knowledge, make people want them, create the infrastructure and so on. This is the only way that it will work. Force them to build it, and then we can make people buy them. I think that it's the other thing that is really important, and before I'm going into infrastructure, because I've been asked to talk about infrastructure, is to remember that the car market is a very unique market. About half of the Californians not buying any new car ever, electric or regular. About 30% buy one new car every many years. And about 20% of the Californian buy again and again, go to the dealers or now order online another car and another car and another car. And if this 20% likes yellow cars, in 10 years from now, many cars will be yellow. If this 20% of the household like electric cars, many cars on the road will be electric. That's the way the car market works, and this is the way it will work in the future, and we need to feed into it our policies. It will be very, very hard to sell an electric car to a household that never purchased any new car. We need to make sure that we allow the used car market to grow. We allow this turnover to happen as fast as we can. Let's talk a little bit about charging. And I would like actually to start, as I said, with who is buying this electric car and who we expect to buy the new electric cars in California. Today, most of the buyers, or in the first 10 years, were these high-income people, $200,000, single family. But now we see more and more of the 75 to 200 that are coming into the market. It's still not the average income for a household in California, but these are the new car buyers that are buying because it's a good deal, not just because it's the new technology or just because it's a great toy, because it's a great deal. And this is going to be a very important market in the next 10 years. And later, we will start seeing the low income that will get the used cars. And that will be the main part of the main shift that we need to be ready. We need to install the infrastructure for, and we need to be ready for. When we talk about these guys, I wrote to myself a note here about disadvantaged communities. We were working on this topic for about 5 years now. And disadvantaged communities are not disadvantaged households or people in California. And a lot of the infrastructure installed in disadvantaged communities is, and I will say it as blunt as I can, straightforward just gentrification. In the community, there are a couple of high income people who can buy a Tesla, and we can check, oh, we have a charger in this low income community, but the users are not the community members that actually need it. We need to make sure that we install chargers for the people who needs it and not just for the regions or the communities in general. Very, very hard and tall order, but we need to do it. So how many chargers will we need? Most of the chargers are already almost exist. These are people with garages connected to their own meter. All they need is to go online and buy a charger or to call an electrician and install a charger. But we need to make it easy for them because that's the number one charging opportunity. The cheapest charging has been told, and the most important one. That will save us installing more of the public chargers. The number two is the workplace chargers. And we will have to have in 2030 about 2 million of those. Now, when I said workplace chargers, I'm not talking about chargers at your employer's location. Chargers at BART station are workplace chargers. I would like people to drive to the BART station, stop there, plug in their car, and ride transit for the rest of the ride. Park and drive locations are workplace chargers. We need to push more of the money that we think about it as workplace chargers into these locations that will allow us to drive only to the best location to take transit and drive into the city. So it's not workplace chargers, but maybe we should call it charge while you are at work. These are the places that we really want to push forward. And third place is public chargers. And when I'm talking about public chargers, I'm actually talking about mostly two use cases. People who don't have a way to charge at home, which mean that they cannot connect the charger to their own meter. They have no control over their rates. And people who work in the city and use public charger, as I said before, for their work charging while at work. These are the two most important use cases that we are pushing for. Now, for our cities, for our jurisdictions, what do we need to think about? And I want to finish in 1 minute, so I will kind of jump quite a lot, and I will say, what do we need to think about? We need to think about not installing chargers and said we installed 1,000 chargers or the federal government 500,000 chargers. We need to talk about installing capacity and capability for the next 10 years. If we pay all of our money to a private company to install a charger, they will install it. Will the charger be there, reliable and dependable for our drivers 10 years from now? I'm not sure. It's still very, very hard to make money from selling electricity to EV drivers. It's going to be hard in the future. We need to think about private-public partnerships. We need to think about chargers that will be owned by the city and a company, and 10 years from now will still be controlled by the public, so we will have control over the time that they are on, the reliability, the pricing, and so on. Just installing chargers, that's just the number of chargers. I know it's very appealing, it looks great on our reports, but it's not enough. We need to install, maybe take more money and put it into making sure that we have a reliable and dependable infrastructure. And I think that this is just one example of $100 million that went into install chargers. None of these chargers exist right now. They all disappear when the company went bankrupt. And I have many more examples like that. And I will stop here, and I hope that we'll have a great discussion in the few minutes left. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. Jack and Amos, do we have time for questions, or how are we going to proceed?
Yes, we do. Please go ahead and take time.
Okay, let's look and see if we have some questions in I guess I have a first question for Gil, which is, we've been very concerned about the reliability, the dependability, the uptime of chargers, because anyone who has taken a longer drive in California having to use the high-powered chargers, the DC fast chargers, has found not a good situation. Let's just put it that way. What can you say about the kind of regulation we need, so it's not just numbers of chargers? The chargers have to work in a way that really serves the public. Otherwise, people are not going to use them, are not going to get electric vehicles.
You're absolutely right. And what we need is a dependable network that I can jump into my car and drive from Davis to San Diego, knowing that the chargers will be there for me. And I'm saying dependable because technical reliability is only one part. It's an important part, but it's only one part. I think that my answer is changing the way we subsidize public infrastructure and thinking about new types of ownership to the infrastructure. Thinking about charging infrastructure as any other transportation infrastructure, meaning a system like BOT, build, operate, transfer, when the charger is owned by the public, or at least partially by the public, and the company that get the money to install them need to make sure that 10 years later, they are still there, they're still working, and they kind of refresh them if they need, and then the second owner can take ownership and so on. So it will cost us more, because right now we pay for installation, and 5 years later, we hope that they are still there. It will cost us more, but I think that it's a very important next step. And we need to be very innovative also about business opportunities. So it will, in the long run, will start be a kind of a valid business case.
Who do you see as the right person? Carlene has her hand up. I'll let Carlene go.
Thank you. Gil, this is a question for you as well. So future proofing, and what will these stations look like? What will technology be in 5 years? And we're looking to make this massive investment in California and nationally. And I'm thinking about all the innovation taking place, and I'm wondering about that same question. How do these exist in 5 years as reliable stations, and how do we make these investments so that we don't kind of have to throw everything out in 5 years and start anew?
Yeah, a great question, because it's important not to throw the baby with the water here. We are pretty much know what the technology will look like in the next 20 years with electric cars. And cars that's been sold on the road today and in the next 10 years will be on the road 20 and 30 years from now. The connectors, the type for fast charging connector, it's called CCS. That's the standard. That's what going to a car that will come off the assembly line in 2030 will use the same connector. The home connectors, the J7072, a car that will come off the assembly line in 15 years from now, 20 years from now, will use the same connector. We should not be worried about this investment in the chargers, in the hardware. But as any hardware, we need maintenance, and that's what we should be worried about. We need a back end that will collect the money and so on. We need someone who will pay the electricity bills. I saw chargers in Davis that were installed next to a nice supermarket. The supermarket decided to leave, turn off the power, and that's it. All of these things are the problems, and not the technology or future-proof technology. We are, I think, good with that.
Yeah, can I make one more comment about that? Which is, part of this is the construct of the way that the incentives and the subsidies are conditioned, that they literally are for get the stations in the ground. And even if there are reliability standards or conditions in the incentives, there's basically no enforceability currently, and there's no money put aside for maintenance and service. So I think it really starts at the top level from the state, from the CEC and CARB, and even Biden administrative plan that we accommodate things for maintenance and service, so that this can, it's a big concern of ours as well.
Well, it sounds like chargers are utilities or should be utilities, not, privately owned brands with each one having their own little protocol and so forth. Because if everyone's going to have an electric vehicle, they have to use it. It's like a utility, but public owned one, I should hope. Okay, we have a question for Tim. This says, how can we have long duration storage for green hydrogen that's cost effective? Can we use geological storage?
I just typed an answer in the chat. Check out the Intermountain Power Project in Utah. Geologic storage is only in certain places, but it is in several locations, and California is one of them. So when you start electrolyzing from renewable energy that's 100 megawatts or more, hydrogen gets real cheap.
Okay, I have a note that we have a lot of questions about storage. I don't see them right now. Beth, can you help me out on that?
Sure. So we had a question from Nick a little while back about, I think this is a question for Tim, about clarifying at which point of the process is carbon free. And we have questions about, well, I think the one that Elena just said about long duration storage. And a comment also for Tim from Mark Geller about it's not equivalent to put renewable power in the grid or divert it to make hydrogen. Questions about efficiency of the hydrogen.
Yeah, efficiency is a good one. Now, be careful you don't get into a petroleum mindset. What we want is to harvest as much renewable energy, which means not paying for finite fuel. This is unlimited fuel. We want to capture as much renewable energy as possible. And that's where hydrogen can help in areas where it becomes uneconomic to do it by the grid. So, and efficiencies stack up strangely when you start talking about DC fast chargers and large battery installations to capture intermittent renewables. The SGIP program showed over the past couple of years, C&I installations of large batteries are something like 80% efficient. So as you stack those up, the efficiencies start to come closer to each other. But what's most important is our ability to capture as much renewable energy as possible without externalities and distribute it to where we need it. And that's where having both technologies available really helps. I hope I got that because I forgot the other question.
All right. I just wanted to make a comment to Lily, which is that, I've been working on a project in Novato where there was a gas station. It hasn't been there for 30 years and the soil still needs to be remediated. So, when the city councils think, great, this will be a good way of making money, they're not looking at the back end of it, which is that benzene and other chemicals gets into the water table. And no one's thinking about that. So I know you are. So thank you.
Yeah. I'm glad to help. To be honest, like this entire gas station thing, I didn't even realize how big it was going to be. And then I was like, oh, I'm making this into a whole campaign now.
You thought you were just studying. You have a whole new career. Do we have any more questions? And I think we're probably almost out of time. Beth, is there anything we left in the chat that we didn't answer or didn't pose?
I'm sure that there is a lot in the chat. In terms of questions, there's a lot of comments and kind of people talking to each other there. Let's see. There are a few people's concerns about the timeline for phasing out gas cars and not being aggressive enough. Let me look here too.
Well, I think that's a good one. Why don't we have different panelists address that?
Okay.
I saw Carlene had her hand up on that one. Go ahead, Carlene.
Yes, so I agree it's not aggressive enough. I think one of the concerns when I was working with the governor was about the equity issue of, do we have sufficient alternatives to gas cars, such as with EVs? Do we have the infrastructure that's required and the economic policies that's required for low-income and disadvantaged communities is transit. Do we have adequate transit? Do we have adequate active transportation, whether it's bike lanes, et cetera? And so the concern was that if the ban was earlier, that we wouldn't have enough time to really adjust and to make these changes. Now, on the other hand, of course, by pushing it back to 2035 and relieving that pressure of that deadline, it kind of tends to have things move more slowly. So I think, from a climate perspective, absolutely, it needs to be advanced. But, we really need to work on a lot of these equity issues so that we can really, ban the gas car and know that we're not leaving people behind.
Okay.
Yeah, one more point on that, and I absolutely agree that the main issue is if we push it faster, the cost will go up exponentially, and mostly on lower income and communities that struggle more. If they will have to replace their old car with a new expensive car, we will have to put a lot of subsidies on it. And if we will wait just a little bit longer, the big global trend will help us reduce the cost of these cars, and we are trying to ride this wave, this global wave. And at the kind of same token, California can just be a little bit ahead of the rest of the country, or maybe much more, but we cannot do it by ourselves. California cannot be 100%. If anyone can just go up to Nevada and buy a gasoline car, let's say used car with 5 miles on it, and drive it back to California. So there is just so much that we can push forward without. And no gas stations, yeah, that's I think probably a really great idea, but you have to remember we will have old gas cars on the roads for all the way to 2045, and some people will have no other options. So it will be hard to push that. Higher gas tax, and what the Professor Sperling was talking about, fee baits, moving money from the gas guzzlers to the clean drivers, and this kind of policies is what we need to push for.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to turn it back to our organizers for last moments.
Thank you. Thank you, Elena, and thank you to everyone for being here today. I also wanted to give Eduardo Martinez an opportunity to make an announcement. If he's still here and wants to do that. But I just wanted to thank the panelists, the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force members that show up to our meetings. Thank you to the steering committee and the planning and logistics who helped organize this today. And to Jack Fleck, who really took the lead on this. We, as a steering committee, we each member of the steering committee has taken on a topic, and today's was Jack's, and he did a great job. Thank you, Jack. And thank you to the panelists, speakers, Assembly Member Phil Ting, Dan Sperling, and everyone here that's been here today. And if Eduardo isn't able, oh, okay, great. So take it away and make your announcement.
All right. Monday, August 30th, there will be an action in front of the building of the DTSC building in Sacramento. The building is on the corner of I Street and 10th. The building's 1001 I Street, and then afterwards, after the action, it takes place at 12. And then after the action, there'll be activities at Cesar Chavez Park, which is nearby. I'll put it in the chat so that you have the information, but it's basically to tell the Environmental Protection Agency and DTSC that they're not doing their job. We need them to step up and protect the people. One of the previous speakers was talking about a gas station that's still not cleaned up. It needs to be cleaned up, and anytime government makes decisions on developments or cleanups, they need to make sure that the developments are not going to create more pollution, and that when pollution is created, it needs to be cleaned up so that we can use the land. Anyway, that's it. So hope to see you there. I put it in chat, so sorry. I'll just repeat it. August 30th, Sacramento, ETSC building, Cal EPA, 10th and I Street, 12 o'clock. Hope to see you there.
Thank you, Eduardo. So yeah, get on the train, take it to Sacramento, and be part of that action on that day. We all need to be standing in solidarity with each other. One struggle is all our struggles, and we are in some tumultuous times. We're in the pandemic, so we have to remember that the variant is upon us, and we have to mask up. Reach out to someone you haven't talked to in a while, because COVID has presented a lot of challenges, and people need to be in contact with each other and make sure everyone's doing okay. So thank you all again for being here. Thank you to everyone who actually helped organize this and get it together. And we're right on schedule. We're ending like maybe a minute or two early. So that's amazing too. But stay healthy, be safe, and wear your mask, double mask, and keep your distance. Wash your hands. If you are able to, donate, and just stay healthy and be safe. And thank you, Amos, for facilitating and all the introductions, and everyone. Yeah. It's the sun's not shining. We're in the climate emergency, so we all have to do our parts. But we have to keep smiling, because when you smile, even though you're wearing your mask, you can see it in your eyes. So keep up the smile and stay healthy and be safe, everyone. Thank you.